unproductive things that I've ever seen is the giving, receiving, collecting, and understanding of feedback. It is a plague that hits every organization, hits every leader. It's a skill that we all run into eventually in our careers. I personally have read over 1 million employee comments from company surveys, from employee one-on-one performance reviews. So I am knee deep in the worst of this process and the best of this process. So I really want to share my context with you to really find that hidden value. So we'll talk a little bit about what does feedback look like one-on-one? What does that look like at scale? And really try to take the application of a feedback mindset. What does that look like tactically in the organization? So Aubrey, does that work for you? Tim, does that work for you?
That would be great.
Okay. And you guys will notice I am very relaxed. So if I'm saying something, please come off of me and say, "Hey, Tim, that's interesting. What would that look like here?" Or have you ever seen something like this? My goal is to bring my context to this conversation. So I think any time you talk to me, you'll notice I try to start in theory. What does the hard science tell us about this topic? We don't have to guess. There are plenty of people that have come before us, and we can learn from their experience. So the base theory of why do we need feedback? If it's this painful thing that no one really likes to dive into, why are we so obsessed with it? Why is it a chapter in every business book? And really the goal of feedback is to prevent blind sides. If you think about your perspective as a leader, the way you make decisions, you have a scope of reference, a field of vision, if you want to call it. And that field of vision is really made up of a lot of different things. And that field of vision can actually get cloudy. It can it can prevent you from seeing the whole board, as I like to call it, to make really good decisions. And your experience of how you grew up, what was your first job, what's your perception of authority, that experience of your view of the world can become a blind spot. Because you're conditioned to see things in a specific way, you may miss something. I did not wake up to a rooster this morning. That would be super weird for me. But if I lived on a farm, that would be my experience and that would be normal. So Tim Fitzpatrick probably could not accurately identify what a rooster sounds like because it's not in my experience. That is a blind spot. Those experiences will also lead to specific bias, cognitive and implicit and explicit bias. Bias we can control and bias that we decide that is just part of our human condition. It's something we need to be aware of. That field of vision can also get really crowded when we're just focused on the current priorities. You guys are all pretty busy leaders. If I took a look at your calendars, I can almost guarantee some of them look like a rectangle. That's your focus. That is going to prevent any type of outside the box thinking. That's really what we're focused on. So that's a obstruction to your field of vision. There's also that you only have so much headspace. This is a classic founder's problem. If you started your own business and when you get to a certain point, your team starts to grow, you start to realize, I don't have all of the knowledge anymore. I just don't have it. You physically can't hold that in your head, and you need the perspective of other people to widen your scope. So for an individual, feedback is dramatically important to help prevent blind sides. The diversity of experience makes you better. So that's why we ask for feedback. Make sense? So what happens for an organization? Why do organizations want feedback? And to kind of step through that, I want to tell a little story about airplane pilots in the 1950s. Kind of out of left field, but a very apropos analogy to what we're about to discuss. In the 1950s, there were test pilots that were trying to break the sound barrier. So they ran into a pretty interesting problem where if I go too fast, my plane blows up. So what do? When you graph that mathematical problem, it looks something like this. The faster I go, the less control I have. So what do? I slow down to get more control. So as you can see, as that line drops on the speed side, it moves higher on the control side. And every single test pilot, this is classic business jargon, the term pushing the envelope. If you've ever heard that term in kind of business language get thrown around, this is actually the graphical representation of what that phrase means. This is pushing the envelope, because everyone is trying to find that sweet spot of how fast can I go without losing control. And it's called pushing the envelope because if you tilt your head a little bit, it actually looks like an envelope. So this was a problem for test pilots. Why is it a problem for leaders trying to get good feedback that's going to help them improve? Well, this same mathematical problem works if I just change the variables from speed to head count and control to communication, collaboration, and coordination. What I mean by that is if you've ever been on a Zoom call with 5 people, you know that's very different than a call with 10 people, which is different than 50, which is different than 150. Working at a company of 500 people is very different than working at a company of 10,000 people. The more people I add to this equation, the harder it gets to communicate, collaborate, and coordinate. That's the fundamental problem that every scaling organization runs into. So there's actually 2 ways to solve this problem. You could just make smaller teams. You could just break your organization up into smaller teams and have them run really fast. The drawback to that option is that your org chart then blows up tremendously and looks like Candyland because you've now just hired 1 million more managers. And now you've created a different problem where the CEO can't get to the frontline employee and vice versa. It's a trade-off, but an option. The other option is you could impact your culture. You could build an intentional culture where feedback is not a fearful thing, where feedback is openly asked for and acted upon. And when you do that, you effectively push this envelope. Just think about that for a moment. I like to think about feedback in kind of the same category as accountability. We all kind of know it's important. It's a very important leadership skill. We don't really like to talk about it. It's easier to say, hey, you be accountable. Hey, I have some feedback for you. It's easier to kind of put it on other people. And it's just, it's a hard definition to think about. Everyone kind of, if I ask, hey, what's your definition of feedback? What's your definition of accountability? Everybody has kind of a slightly different tweak on it. And just saying the word changes the mood of the conversation. If you've ever been tapped on the shoulder and said, hey, can I give you some feedback? Oh, yikes. Hey, I'm going to hold you accountable. Ugh, it just changes the tone of the conversation. So that's why I tend to think of those 2 things together. And if you as a strategist think of them in the same way, you then start to realize that you can't just look at the topic as a big topical heading. You have to break it down. The same way accountability can't exist without clarity. You can't have the same feedback conversation one-on-one at scale. And if you've ever Googled just feedback, if you ever went to HBR and said, hey, how many articles are there on feedback? There's over 10,000 articles over the past 2 years about feedback. And a majority of them are about one-on-one feedback because that's the one you usually run into. That's the one their readers are the most scared about. But a lot more damage can happen for team feedback and one-on-one feedback. So to kind of break that down a little bit is your feedback has to match the moment. As my partner Dan Silver would say, you have to know the context around you. So if you're in a one-on-one feedback situation, if you're trying to find that hidden value to make sure that that's not a scary conversation where 2 people have a lot of friction and then walk away worse off, where the relationship actually gets damaged, how do you make sure that you can give quality feedback where the relationship gets improved? And a tactic that I've seen work very well during performance reviews when the conversation could not be more critical and the stakes couldn't be higher is just a concept called you first. If you are uncomfortable sharing feedback with someone, or if you see something that's wrong on your team and you just don't want to say anything because you don't want to rock the boat, but you know it's vital to the success of your team. If you need to share that feedback, think about you first. And what that means is you have to admit how you're feeling first before you deliver the feedback. So if I said, hey, Emily, you and I actually have never met each other. We've only been working virtually. We haven't been working together that long, but I think you're brilliant, and I'm not sure how to give you this feedback because I'm very nervous that it'll hurt our relationship. That's the first truth. But Emily, the reports that you've been sending to clients, they're riddled with misspellings, and it's actually impacting the credibility of our firm. Immensely valuable feedback. Now, if you notice what I did there is I didn't do a compliment sandwich. It wasn't a upfront, hey, here's the feedback. If you are in the disc profile, if you are a S or a C, if you're a dove or an owl, it's very tempting to then try to squeak in a compliment to lessen the blow. But you first is all about you admitting how you're feeling, then delivering the feedback as best you can. So sometimes that can help, and it humanizes you. The other individual can see you as someone who is trying to help. You want that other person to see you as somebody who wants things to get better. People don't tap you on the shoulder to deliver feedback to ruin your day. That's the someone has to go first. If you lift me, I'll lift you, and we'll go together. Now, that's more of a consistency over intensity. You have to, that's part of your brand as an individual to give good feedback. But if you're a little nervous, you just got to get the ball rolling. Start with you first. It's a good strategy. The other one is team feedback. So this is if you're in a meeting and you see the meeting moving in the wrong direction, or you think the team is wasting time talking about not something that's topical, or you're giving a presentation to folks. There's a concept called sharpened spears, and one of my mentors taught me this early in my career. And the story he used to tell is there's a small village, and a runner comes up over the hill and says, hey, everybody, there's an army on the other side of that hill that wants to smash our gate and take everything. That's the message that the runner delivered to everyone. Everyone goes, okay. Kind of keeps going about their day. Yeah, maybe. Okay, the walls are pretty thick. I think we're good. We have some good guards up there. I think we'll be okay. Until they actually come over the hill and then everyone starts to panic. If you are trying to get your message across and you're having trouble just really getting folks to latch on to what you're saying, you want to sharpen spears. If that runner came over the hill and said, hey, there's an army over there that wants to come over this hill, smash down our walls, and take everything. Here's a spear I sharpened from that tree over there, and there's 50 more trees, and we can make a lot more spears. I think we should start making spears, guys. Same exact message up front, but with a tangible action for the problem. People are much more likely to hear your message. So if you have to give feedback to someone, don't just give them the message. Give them a tangible way to move the ball forward. If you've ever launched an employee survey at your company, this is something you're going to want to write down. You don't just throw a report to a manager and say, hey, those are your employee survey results. Good luck. We want to make sure we give them next steps. And I'll unpack that feedback at scale a little bit, but sharpen spears. If you're in HR, that's going to be a huge tactic for you to make sure your leaders actually hear you. And then the last one is scaled feedback. So this is the classic annual engagement survey. This is that you're surveying the entire organization. You're getting feedback from all employees at the same time. You want to play the long game. That is not a event. You don't want to think of scaled feedback as an event. Too many times we think about it as a project because there are a lot of moving parts. We have to physically plan the project. But really, scaled feedback is about starting a dialogue. If you think about it as a conversation, you will plan your project very differently. You'll think about how to send a thank you to employees after they provide their feedback. You'll then consider how to close the loop with employees so they understand what the top themes were. Nothing is worse than surveying employees and then never talking to them again. That is literally like if I said, "Hey, Tim, how you doing?" And then Tim physically just turned around and walked away from me. That's the equivalent of not at least acknowledging employees' feedback at scale. So think about it as the long game. Am I going to survey all my employees? Am I going to have my CEO send an email to give them a heads up that the survey is safe to take? Are my employees a little bit distrustful of senior leaders? Do I have to do some prep work? Am I just going to send one email to say, "Hey guys, there's a survey coming," or do I have to do some other thing? There's a lot that's embedded into your context there. But think about scaled feedback as the long game. You are starting a conversation. Any questions here just about how this rolls up, one-to-one feedback, team feedback, and then just think about all employees scaled feedback? Okay. Make sense for folks? Okay. And Lauren, if anything comes through the chat, be my guest. You know me, the clock will keep running and I'll just keep going. So just give me a heads up.
Will do.
Awesome. So when we think about scaled feedback, because the scale is so large, that's where the most problems tend to happen. There's a lot of customers out there that I've seen, they launch a survey, it kind of doesn't do what they needed to do, and then they abandon it. They say, we'll do something else. We'll find another strategy. And there are very easy, avoidable pitfalls to thinking about feedback at scale. And the first one is the truth hurts, is usually the first reason why feedback at scale doesn't work. We don't prep our leaders the right way to read the reports. We don't. Everyone's kind of fearful of what everyone else is going to say. A lot of mid-level managers just want to read all the comments to see what everyone said. So there's this concept that Velocity has run into many, many times, and we use a model called SARA. And anytime you're showing someone else's feedback, that's the key here, is it's not your feedback that you're delivering, but you're delivering feedback on behalf of employees, on behalf of someone else. You need to prep your leaders. If you've ever, this is a bit of a dated reference, but if you guys remember Charlie Brown in the classroom, his teacher sounds something like this. Wah, 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 wah. When someone gets bad news, when they're scared or when they're angry, they physically cannot hear the information that's coming in. Everyone sounds like Charlie Brown's teacher. Wah, wah, wah. If you've ever watched a movie where someone was in a car accident or the main character gets bad news, that ringing happens and you can't hear, that's based on science. That's not a Hollywood add-in. The brain fires at about 215 miles an hour, the electrical current in your brain. When you're scared or when you're angry, it slows down to about 87 miles an hour. When you're scared or when you're angry, you're dumber. You make bad decisions. We don't want scared and angry people leading our organizations. We want them clear-eyed. We want them to be able to see the whole board. So we walk people through surprise. That's usually the first stage when someone gets news that they weren't expecting. Employees and leaders, when they get the feedback, they can come off as a little annoyed or angry for the A there. That's where they're just getting riddled with employee comments again and again and again. They're like, you know what? I spend 10 hours a day at this job. Who are you to tell me what to do? You'll see that if we don't prep people through the stages, because leaders, they put their blood, sweat, and tears into the organization. So for someone to deliver that feedback to them, they're probably going to get a little annoyed at some point. Then they start to rationalize. Well, it was because of the merger. There a lot of things happened. We just changed managers out. I mean, come on, COVID just hit. This was kind of expected. The smarter you are, the longer you spend in rationalization. Smart people are really clever and they're really good at finding ways to explain things. So just be aware that your team will go through that step. Then they have to get to acceptance. Regardless of what happened, these are the scores. This is the feedback that's been delivered. And then finally, people can move into help. So that model will dramatically help you make sure that your message actually gets heard. The number 5 on this list is anyone can take feedback. Anyone can pretend that they're listening to you. If Lauren said, hey, Tim, I have some feedback for you, I could just stare into my camera and just nod my head and say, yep, got it. It's the acting on the feedback is what actually changes things. So if you're conducting a survey, one of the most cited reasons for why are you conducting an employee survey is we just want a baseline. It's time. We do it every year. I want to get the trending data. I want to see what has moved. Good answer, just not good enough. We want to make sure that we are asking specific questions for a specific reason. So use your business context. This comes up a lot with if you're using a survey vendor that has preloaded questions, they'll just hand them to you and say, hey, go for it. Ask some questions there. Say, hey, here's some of my business context. I want to make sure that this is captured here. Hey, this just happened. Can we make sure that this gets included? So if your vendor has a preset, fab of questions, highly recommended. They're probably benchmarked. They're probably really good questions. They've been tested. Just make sure that some of them reflect your business context because you are unique. So that's just the anyone can take feedback. And lastly, just make sure it's the right timing. I've seen a lot of folks blow their fourth quarter because they want to get the survey out. But if your teams are driving towards a goal, just make sure it's the right time. If I am in the middle of a conversation, I typically don't start another one. That's one-on-one feedback that doesn't scale very well. So just make sure it's the right time in the business. Other surveys, you just ask the wrong questions. And I kind of start to chuckle here because the CEO is typically the biggest culprit of this. CEOs tend to fall in 2 camps when we think about employee surveys. They're either really engaged and they want to touch everything and they want to read every single employee comment so they can say they read every single employee comment. Or, yeah, it's the survey, helpful, not really business specific, not really going to impact how my decision-making process, but it's good that we're starting the conversations. CEOs typically fall into one of those 2 camps. So if your CEO is in camp A that is saying, hey, I want to touch everything, share the questions with them because they're going to have an opinion on them. And if you're in camp B, a really good way to engage your CEO to get them into the process is when you share the questions with them, say, hey, if we scored really bad on any of these questions, which one would hurt the most? Then that's where you're going to structure your presentation first. So you're trying to understand not all the questions are going to have the same level of importance to all of your stakeholders. The CEO is going to look for something in that report that a mid-level manager is not going to see or wants something different. So ask, hey, it's a really good tactic if you want to engage the whole senior leadership team, but to say, hey, on these questions, if we scored really low, which one would hurt the most? The other is just people use the wrong tools. And here, I'm looking right at you, SurveyMonkey. SurveyMonkey has made surveying easy and accessible, but it does not scale to solve complicated business problems in a complicated world. SurveyMonkey is about quick, easy, snap feedback. They do great research. I've read a lot of it, but know what that tool is capable of and know the context you're trying to use them in. If you are conducting your annual employee survey, you need a comprehensive tool that's going to get you what you need quickly. I also try to coach folks to just map out all of their stakeholders. Map out all of your stakeholders before you launch the survey and think about what does this group need? What does this group want? Employees want to know they're heard. Middle managers want to know that they're not getting targeted, that they're being assessed, that will be a tool. Am I being measured? Am I being tracked? CEO will want that. So you may have stakeholders that have conflicting conflicting wants and desires through the process. Just make sure you understand them before you click launch. Number 2, anonymity is not an invisibility cloak. Sometimes companies will get super, super hung up on anonymity. There may be a low trust environment that employees are unsure of. So the key here is be on the same page with your employees. Crisply communicate. Hey, we're launching a survey. We're setting a confidentiality threshold at this many people, meaning I can't see this. And then the big one is be continuous. When you ask for continuous feedback, it builds that level of trust. Employees want to know that they're not being assessed, but that you're trying to learn. Again, when I said if you launch your project as a dialogue, you just structure things very, very differently. And I'll say that second bullet point there, be clear, and then be ready to be clear again. I typically use the rule of 7 when you're launching surveys. You might have to say something 7 times for an employee to actually hear it and digest it for the first time. So just be aware, you want to be on the same page when it comes to anonymity. And then lastly, feedback is really 2 different weak muscles that have to be used together at the same time in order for it to work. Some folks will say it takes 2 to tango. But giving feedback is a very different muscle than receiving feedback and putting it into action. I can work up the courage to give you feedback from my perspective, but you could say, nope, I'm good. You may not believe in my credibility. You may not believe that I'm a subject matter expert on this. So if you really want to turn feedback into something that's of value into the organization, that's going to turn the gears for progress, leaders can't just accept the feedback. They have to put it into practice. So these are the biggest fails I've seen. I cannot tell you how many projects that I've seen where we hit number 1 out of the park, but number 4, not so much. If we really want to have a comprehensive strategy that employees believe in, I kid you not, there are organizations out there where employees look forward to the annual survey because it's their chance to be heard. In large organizations, that sometimes can be a really tough thing when an employee knows that, hey, I'm going to write something and my CEO is going to see it. I have a chance to make an impact. That's a really powerful thing. That is an empowered business environment where people can innovate very clearly. So Tim Nelson, any questions on the big feedback fails that we've seen?
Not directly. Well, you may touch on this later on, but I was going to ask about going from annual surveys to like pulse surveys, and another element of year over year when you're doing annual surveys. What about the time in between to show employees that, you know, they're making an effort on the time they invested giving their feedback?
It's a good call. If you're thinking about your 2021 strategy and you have the big annual survey and you're trying to figure out what's a good cadence to ask for feedback, to say, hey, are we getting better on this? Typically, there's 2 strategies. One pulsing strategy is to ask the same questions over and over and over. That only has so much staying power. If I keep asking you the same question every quarter, and I don't see anything changing, I'm going to stop responding. And the response rate is going to be your first indicator that your strategy is working. The scores will tell you the scores, but pay really close attention to that response rate the first couple times you send a pulse survey. So if you're doing that pulse strategy again and again and again, may not work at scale. That may work at specific departments, or it may work on specific one-on-ones. So I would highly, highly, highly suggest, if you are going to go down the route of a pulse strategy, make sure it's specific to you. If you have focus areas that come out of your annual survey, those are the areas we're going to pulse on. Look at your strategic plan and line it up with the feedback that came out of your survey. Those are the areas we're going to pulse on. Don't pulse just to pulse. People don't like to engage in conversations that have nothing to do with them. So that's where people can get hung up a little bit, because I'll be honest, I love a good trending chart. I love to see the numbers go up, but don't launch a poll survey just to get the chart. Launch the poll survey to get a conversation going. Make sense? Okay. So thinking about gathering feedback at scale, we just have to be really clear-eyed about what's happening. It's 2021. We have quite literally an airborne virus has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans and many more people worldwide. There are variants coming in. We've had racial injustice creep into our social conversation, protests, riots, an attack on the American Capitol. There is a lot going on in the world right now, and there's a lot going on in your employees' worlds. When we take a look at the numbers, it is a stark realization of the environment that we're trying to grab feedback in. Well-being is at a 12-point low since we started measuring it for employee health. Working from home, at first, when in March, when I started launching my own surveys and my own research, and my colleagues were sending me things to take a look at, everybody was like, "Oh, working from home." Everyone says flexibility is the number one benefit there. But most likely, if you're a senior leader in the organization, you traded your commute time for more work time. The average workday has expanded 3 hours for employees. People have greater autonomy to do work when they want to work, but that has now blended the lines between work and home. It's getting harder. That's leading to a mental health crisis. Symptoms of anxiety have tripled since August. Depression has quadrupled. And motivation is taking a hit. Now, the interesting thing is that productivity has been up. That was a classic article that we were all seeing, is that, hey, this remote work thing, it seems to be working for folks. But we're burning the candle at both ends. Telephone activity is up, CRM activity is up, email, chat, all of those tools that we use to measure collaboration are up. And so is employee engagement. It has risen at a pace faster than has ever happened before since we started measuring in the 40s. It's up 30, it's up a tremendous percent. So I'm interested, if you guys could use the chat feature, if you're listening, take a critical eye. If you take a critical eye and look at all of these stats, and which one jumps out to you the most? So take a second, use your critical thinking cap. Which one of these jumps out to you the most? Depression is up. Motivation is down. We're working more, producing more. What jumps out to you? So open up the chat feature.
So we have well-being. Aubrey says engagement surprises me the most. Heather, employee engagement. And she also asked why up when the rest is also up.
Yeah.
Tim, mental health, another well-being, motivation followed by engagement, and productivity and motivation.
Okay.
So lots of motivation.
Yeah, good thinking here, guys. This is a paradox. We're quite literally staring at a paradox. How is it possible that employee engagement goes up, but everything else that we use to measure the quality of life goes down? How is that possible? Think about what engagement is. Think about it as a metric. People were really engaged with their employer because they were afraid they were going to lose their job. I was very engaged. If you think about how we measure engagement, is it activity with my manager? Is it I'm not looking for another job? How do you think about the things that make up engagement and how we measure it? It's a paradox. And it's time that we take an honest look at what we're calling employee engagement. A lot of us in HR, in senior leadership roles, we're gathering feedback, and that's the golden metric that we're after. We set strategic plans around it. We will increase engagement by 5%. I want to be very clear-eyed with you. That is going to be a flawed strategy in 2021. To set an engagement goal and then to aggressively pursue after. We're going to push engagement up by 5%. That strategy works for the team level. We are seeing a transformation. COVID has upended a lot of things. And the company having a relationship with the team, with the organization, pushing the whole group forward, the same way that we have to break down feedback to get more specific, we have to break down our strategies to get more specific to impact the individual. There is a flurry of new tools entering the market that are centered around mental health and well-being and specifically focused on the individual. So this is a long way of saying if you're launching a survey, if you're gathering any type of feedback from employees, ask about their personal well-being. If you don't ask that question, you are proving that you're not engaged with where your employees are at. We have to meet folks where they are. This is just an unprecedented crisis that is unfolding right before our eyes. And when we think about engagement, I want to break this down a little bit more because I am taking a shot at 30 years worth of research, but the way our tools have adapted to measure engagement, the way we get that report after a survey, it probably looks something like this. You get a heat map. There's disengaged employees. There's engaged employees. Then you have some folks in between, and your map may get a little bit more colorful when you think about it. Here's the problem with this way of looking at engagement. What box do I go in if I'm a top performer who is frustrated and thinks things can get better? What button do I click in the series of questions? What combination of events do I have to click to get into the engaged column? Or do I get accidentally painted as disengaged because I have a strong opinion on how things can get better? What box do I go in if I really hate working here, but I really need this job? How does your tool treat those individuals? Does your tool treat the two people the same way if I take a half hour to complete my survey? It's something very, very, very important to me. And I type comments that I think are relevant versus the person who does the exact same survey but takes 30 seconds to do it. Click, 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 I'm done. The reason I'm breaking this down is because there's just a better way to think about this. There's a better way to understand individuals than this heat mapping conversation. We like it because it's simple. We're boiling a very large topic into something that's simple. But using a classic methodology that we know CEOs will pay attention to, we know chief strategy officers will pay attention to, it's business terminology that we know works. When we start to think about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, think about how we're looking at our employees showing up to work. Think about those questions again. I'm a top performer who's frustrated, but thinks things can get better. Aubrey, I'm interested in your perspective. If you're that person, if you're a top performer, but you're just frustrated, where do you sit?
Opportunity. I would hope it'd be in almost a strength. But I don't think you'd be seen that way. But no, these are really great. Like I just typed in the message bar, just like these two slides, I think are very important for my organization to look at. We are doing our annual right now. Mm-hmm. And yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just, oh, that's good. Now this will be great. And hey, if we want to connect after, I can talk about specific context, everything. I'm here to help. But this is a better way of thinking about how to interact with your population. This is you will be able to get a better understanding of someone that may be there that has different context. Do you want to look at a 6-month employee, Do you ask a 6-month employee about their feelings on the strategic plan the same way you ask a VP of strategy? No. That feedback is not the same. So we need a tool that can think about it. So if you're kicking the tires, there's a lot of different softwares out there. There's a lot of different programs. Try to get very crystal clear on how engagement is measured and how they think about it. Because in 2021, your strategies are going to have to be tailored to individuals. Leaders matter. People follow good leaders. People run away from bad leaders. So getting holistic feedback from the whole organization is important, but we really want to make sure that you can calculate and find those opportunities, that hidden value in the organization. Interestingly enough, Aubrey, and you know, I've read a lot of employee surveys. I typically have to tell folks that, hey, there's about 2% of the population that's going to hate everything you do. They're the sticks in the mud. They're the people that if you bring a present to the party, oh, it's not the latest model. It's just view of the world. One of the most inspiring CEOs I ever got a chance to meet. They were building a strategy and they were really worried. Like they were trying to project plan. They were trying to make sure there were no cracks in the foundation. And he finally had to say, hey, we need to stop here. If we found graffiti in the bathroom, we then would not put a policy in place to say, hey, everybody's got to empty their pockets, can't bring pens into the bathroom anymore. We're not going to do that. We're going to paint over it. We're going to keep going. So you'll hear me again and again, feedback is a muscle. You'll hear me use that analogy because you have to continue exercising it if you want to get any value out of it. Consistency over intensity. That's the name of the game when thinking about feedback at scale. So I'm interested just in this concept. Aubrey, if you take a look at that comment there, we need to get better at communication. How helpful is that to you as a leader?
Oh, I don't really know what to do with that, honestly. But I would like to get better.
So of the million comments that I have read, that is the number one comment that comes through. If I don't know what to type, sounds smart enough. Communication is the common cold of companies. We get good at it, we get bad at it. It's an up, it's a down. Any day of the week you could be really good at it, or any day of the week you could be really bad at it. There are organizations that have a natural muscle to do this very well, and there are strategies you can put in place. But we need to get better at communication is just a generic comment that, yep, that's always true.
Yeah.
What about this comment? Aubrey, is that more helpful to you?
I mean, it's definitely helpful and really narrow. And like, I am an owl, so I'm like, give me something that is specific so that I know what I'm attempting to accomplish and why and what the goal is. Like that I can actually do. Mm-hmm. But also, like, isn't part of the challenge of all of these surveys, like getting something detailed enough that you can work on it, but something broad enough that you're actually going to be powerfully changing the organization? I mean, and actually getting people to help you determine, like asking the questions that get to the root of like, what are the opportunities? And then like getting them to say it in a specific way so that you can change.
Exactly. So that goes back to a little bit asking the right questions. So we want to make sure that we get the right questions to get the right responses. There's a whole host of how we launch the survey so employees feel safe enough to put honest feedback. There's a lot that goes into that. And the way you ask for feedback is going to dictate which comment you get. What level of safety do you have in the organization? What level of trust do you have in the organization? When you can close the loop with employees, do you say, hey, we're going to focus on communication, accountability, and we're going to focus on leadership? If I'm the employee, you've now just given me back what I gave you. We're going to get better at communication. So when you launch your survey and you close the loop with employees, get specific. If you want to improve, if you want to improve the relationship between managers and employees, launch the mentorship program that you guys have been talking about for years. Get key leaders, executive coaches, so that they can have hands-on, real-time business support. So get specific with what you're doing when you close the loop with employees. If you get specific, your employees will get specific. I also try to tell folks when you're reading employee comments, it's very tempting to just read them all like a novel. I had many senior leaders that wanted me to send them PDFs of all of the comments, and that's how they read them. Look for proper nouns first, and then look for things that you know are tied to your strategic plan for 2021, and then read the rest. Okay? Start with what's important first, and you know your team is going to pay special attention to, and then start to move through. That's going to be the best way to get everybody involved. Proper nouns are an easy one. If you have a good tool, you just hit Control F, or in your tool, you'll be able to find it, and you'll be able to do that sorting through. Also, use a tool that does the comment sorting for you. It's 2021, guys. There's a lot of tools out there. Kick the tires a little bit and make sure you have one that can sort all of that. A lot of tools are now using machine learning. They're using AI. Tap into it. It's not as expensive as it used to be before. Those features are now standard in a lot of tools that it can do that sentiment analysis for you. So lastly, if you're thinking about 2021, what things do you need in your toolkit to make sure that you're accurately collecting feedback, you're processing it, you're understanding it, and you're moving on it? The annual employee survey is a juggernaut. It's ingrained into the culture of many organizations. I believe a comprehensive diagnostic can dramatically improve the quality of your people strategy. Surveys are not very good for innovating. They're not. They're usually very good for editing, for turning, for making slight adjustments. You have your strategic plan, and then your survey helps you get there. Surveys are not about managing to morale. I really want to make that crystal clear. You don't launch an employee survey so it has its own metrics that you drive. An intentional culture is one that supports the business strategy. That's what your annual survey is measuring. How aligned is my intentional culture with my business strategy? We don't just crack open the results of the employee survey and say, hey, what's the engagement number? You'll have a lot of leaders that want to do that, but really ground them, use that SARA model, and then really lay the business strategy. If you're presenting survey results and you haven't talked about the business strategy first, your audience, the attention span will drop very quickly. I also believe continuous is better. Most tools have pulse surveys built into them. Find one, use one. It probably won't cost you anymore because that tends to be a standard feature now in a lot of tools. Again, consistency over intensity. I would highly recommend, and Velocity has a strong point of view around team cohesiveness. 2020 was a bad year. It really hurt a lot of our teams. I pay special attention to the Q12 numbers. That question from Gallup. I have a best friend at work. A lot of people have their best friend at work, and they haven't seen them in over a year now. Our teams are getting stretched. The relationships that we worked so hard to cultivate are getting frayed. We really don't know the status of our teams right now. And instead of, if you're a little nervous to launch the big strategic survey, if you just don't think the folks have the appetite, you know your teams. You can systematically launch cohesiveness surveys around the organization just to let people know that you're listening, to say, hey, we know this has been tough. We want to get a better understanding of it. I really caution folks, if you go down that route, and I really suggest you do, you're not assessing the team. You're not spooking the team to say, hey, you've just gotten knocked down. How fast can you get back up? That's not the goal of the team cohesiveness survey. You want to understand the strength of those relationships because that's the number one indicator to the success of that team. The third toolkit I highly recommend you have in your people strategy is the 360. The 360 is still one of the most effective tools for improving, changing behavior of individual leaders. Most of the time, the leader picks their network, or they have some input to say, hey, I want this person, and this person to provide feedback to me. Just by doing that, they've already bought into the process more than they have on an annual strategic survey. They have now invested into what's going to come back to them. It's also one of the easiest ways to instill a feedback culture into the organization. If you do 360s regularly, if senior leadership goes with them and they talk about their experience openly, they talk about what they learned, they talk about what they're committing to.
Quick
It's a, yeah,
question, chat.
please.
Aubrey asked if you could explain 360.
Oh, sure. Yeah, a 360 is, so I want to get feedback on Tim Fitzpatrick. This is a report for Tim Fitzpatrick. So a 360 is it's 360 degrees in a circle. So what is going to happen is my boss, who is above me on the degree, is going to get a survey about me. How am I doing? What's my work like? Where can I improve? What are my strengths? So my boss and any kind of in that supervisory role above me. Then my peers to my side, people that I work with on a day, I don't report to them, but I work with them. They're on my team. They're in my department. So that's the sides of the 360. And then if I'm a manager, anybody that's below me. So a 360, it's describing 360 degrees in a circle with you in the middle. So that's the fancy jargon there, the 360. I really believe it's, if you know you have leaders that are struggling, getting them a coach to walk them through a report, have them work with them for 6 months after the 360 is a really, really strong way to communicate to the organization that feedback's valuable and it works. Like bar none, it's a classic tool that works. In 2021, we all need to think about DEI. We need to think about how we're measuring it, how we're talking about how we're talking about making our organizations more equitable, how we're making them more diverse, and how we're making them more inclusive. You've heard me talk that very first slide I showed. Feedback is about preventing blindsides because it broadens your experience. That is what DEI is about. It's about broadening experiences. Diversity of thought happens when you have people that have diverse backgrounds and experiences. So a lot of folks, they may have dipped their toe into this in 2020, in 2019, but just measuring the demographics in your organization is not enough. It will not be enough in 2021. It is one of the fastest ways to innovate, to diversify your team. And I really say this because I watch trends. It's what I do. The market is going to hold companies accountable for how diverse, how equitable, and how inclusive their cultures are. It is something that job candidates are looking for. So I really, from my point of view, I want to help you look around the curve. I want to help you make sure that if this is not part of your strategy now, that it's on the roadmap to be part of your strategy. There are plenty of tools out there. Velocity has all of these tools. We use them quite a bit with our partners that we work with. If you want help to say, hey, Tim, I'm looking at this tool, or I'm about to make an investment in a tool, or hey, Tim, I've been using this thing for 5 years. Can you help me take a look at it? I will be more than happy to kick the tires on any tool you have, any strategy, any process to make sure that it's going to be a good fit for you in 2021. So I am particularly grateful that you guys have taken time out of your day to really try to get your mind wrapped around, what does feedback look like? How can I use it? How do I make sure that it's not just a sea of noise that I get berated with once a year? How can I make sure that I can sort through the noise and find something that's actionable? I hope you guys took something away that you can kind of put into practice. If you still have some questions, or I introduced a concept that was a little wobbly, or you want to get some more context on it, please reach out. We are here to help. I'm your partner. I'll put my information in the chat box there, but please don't hesitate to reach out. We want to make sure that you're successful.